Here we have my 19-year-old 250,000 mile runaround, and its latest indiscretion, as you may notice, lies somewhere in the rear suspension, or system that pumps it up, because this is an air suspension. When the engine's running, it will pump up quite happily. It's a bit slow pumping up, but it does go up. And then it rises to the correct position. Well, actually rather low. It seems to move in steps. Goes down a bit. Goes up a bit. That's the height of the other side for reference. And this side will sit at almost the right height for a few minutes, and then it will descend. After about a quarter of an hour it's back down here, and if it wasn't for these wretched birds making distracting noises, and generally being birds, they might be able to hear slight hissing. Can't always hear it, but sometimes there's a slight hissing from the airbag. So my assumption is the airbag is bad, but there are actually quite a lot of other potential failure places on this system, which we may discuss later. So I thought I'd try using my iCar Soft diagnostic tool, and suspension seemed like a good place to start. And view data. You'd think level sensors would be helpful, but they're not really. Try vehicle level. It says the rear vehicle level is 12mm under, or minus 12mm. Whether that's 12mm lower than it should be, I don't know. The other place to look, surprisingly enough, is in the headlamp range adjustment. One of the parameters that takes into account is the spring compression at the rear axle, which currently with the engine running is showing minus 15. But if I turn off, need the ignition on to get a signal, and it goes to minus 16. After 5 minutes or so, it's changed by about 6mm, gone down by about 6. And I think the sensor for the spring compression is, I believe, roughly halfway across the axle, so this is probably half of the decline in the back wheel of in the left back wheel. So the car's jacked up, supported in various ways, including some axle stands under here. And now you can see what I believe to be the guilty party, the air spring. And there are various suspension components that we're going to have to remove in order to get those off. Okay, so the air spring is nearly out. I've levered it down from its fitting, which is just a clip up there, and I've worked it out from the suspension components. But the problem I still have is this. Apparently Mercedes sell a special tool for that. People say you can use a 10mm spanner, but I don't think I've got room, so that's work in progress. Okay, I did just manage to turn this with a 10mm spanner. You can just get enough turn on it, and then you slacken it off and remove the tube. And there it is out. A royal pain, but it's out anyway. So here it is. I hope the offending item seems to have spent a long time on the car. It's in fairly poor state. I don't know if that number is going to make any sense, but the bush is quite poor, and the top is quite rusty, and the bits of the clip that holds it up to the top are still visible inside. So quite a mess. I hope we might have some fun with this later. Here's the new one, looks very similar. It was about £120 from eBay. It was about the cheapest I could find. My son wanted me to buy the Arnott ones, but they were twice the price, and since this is supposed to be a cheap runabout, for better or worse, I decided to buy the cheap one. If it goes wrong, at least I'll know how to replace it. It comes with a new clip to go at the top to hang the unit from, and a new fitting for the air pipe. A point to note is that these come in fittings with 2 connectors on the wires, or 3, and I'd already had a look at mine and seen that it was 2. I don't know what the difference is. I don't know if the cars with 4 air springs have 3 maybe, but I don't know. So the replacement has got 2 pins. Another point to note is that the Mercedes original will have a pipe leading away from one side of this, which you have to disconnect if you're using one of these. But this is clearly an aftermarket one already, so well, this doesn't have the Mercedes original pipe. So you screw this in lightly first, the thing they supply, and it comes with this nylon keeper, and once you've screwed it in, then you can remove that keeper, and then it will be possible to just poke the plastic air pipe in and then tighten. This nylon fitting just unscrews, and you screw on another one using a pair of pliers. There's the new one in place. It's just screwed on by hand actually. Now we're going to discard this fitting. The olive will just break off, and we'll just remove that whole thing, because we're going to just poke this pipe into the air spring and then do the nut up. So I think it's going to be easier to try and poke this pipe into the hole before I've finally put the I can't do it one-handed, so I'll turn the camera off, but you can see what I'm doing. It's very hard to tell, but I think that's gone in as far as it will go, and the other thing is to tighten it up. I can't pull it back out again, so I think it's been caught in that olive. Before the air spring is in its proper position, it's probably easier at this point to refit the electrical connector too, so that's what I'm going to do. There's the electrical connector back in, and now I'm going to move the air spring up onto its little nylon latch at the top. Quite impressed you can get a hologram on this air spring, but I don't know what it means. To get the air spring out, obviously this is a new one in, but just to go over how I got it out, 12mm hex for the rear radius arm, and on the front of there, I don't know if it's visible, is a 16mm nut, which obviously a ring spanner is best for. And then there's a 21mm socket on here, which is the main bolt that secures the spring, and the 21mm on the other end. And there's a 16mm which I took off. You can see it, easy to see, there we go. 16mm there, with the 16mm on the other end for the shock absorber bolt. Obviously the main airspring bolt is not optional, but the others just make life a little bit easier. And the other thing you need to consider is what's happening on the other wheel, because that will decide what the preload on the anti-roll bar is. So you may want to jack up the other side so that the anti-roll bar is not putting a lot of stress on the suspension. Another point to consider is that all these bolts should be tightened with the suspension more or less in the position where it will be under normal load when the car is off the jacks. So I've used a little jack to raise the suspension to the point where it's in the normal position. And a further point is that these air springs are supplied, this particular one at least was supplied at reduced length, and it expands once it's pressurized. But before you pressurize it, you're supposed to slightly compress the position of it so that when it expands, it doesn't expand too much. And they're at pains to tell you that in the instructions, that you shouldn't just blow up the airbag straight away. There is a process for it. Another thing I want to do is check for leaks, so I've just sprayed some soapy water on here. I don't know if it's going to focus, but there seems to be no leak anyway. Now everything's back together, the car is at a much more normal height. The sad thing is that perhaps this side that seemed normal before is now perhaps slightly low, so maybe there's another story there. Back to the diagnostics, and whereas before we had minus 15 to start with the engine running, and then it soon went to minus 21, we're now at minus 5, and as I say, that's after only one spring done. In the suspension setting we had, I think, minus 12mm for rear vehicle level, and we've now got minus 4, so it's all looking promising. Now, I said we're going to have some fun with this thing, and I'd like to find out why it went wrong. Bear in mind this one is faulty and therefore has no pressure in it, and indeed you would have had to have released the pressure to remove the spring, but just bear in mind that this is a pressure vessel effectively, and could have pressure in possibly. So I've removed the cable ties holding the boot on, and now I'm just going to cut down the side and take this boot off. So there is the inside of the spring in all its lack of glory, and I think we can see where the problem lies. The rubber has disintegrated, and you can see the fibres, and that's where our air was coming out, albeit slowly. If I put a little pressure on it, you can hear it leaking. It's It's always satisfying to find a problem. And if we cut the boot open, the actual spring itself, you can see it's quite a thin fabric reinforced rubber, but as an added bonus we've got some water in the bottom, so I guess that must have leaked in. I don't know if it's been pumped in by the air pump or leaked in through the holes in the boot. So I've taken an angle grinder to these horrible rusty screws so that the top can come off, and then what we have here is the unit that allows the air in. It does lift up. So there it is. It's got the electrical connector there and the air connector there, and that pipe goes through to the pressure chamber of the spring. There's a little nylon pad there, and I don't know what signal or effect this electrical connector has, but might be possible to find out from these numbers maybe. And if someone knows, please leave it in the comments.